Wow, with Niraj and Eric, this is it feels a little like a reunion. This is great.
Yes, it is great.
Someone needs to wake up Louis though.
I think it's between Louis and me. One of us can only join. There's too much time zones alignments to be done.
All right, should we go ahead get started?
Yeah.
Who wants the future status update? Do we need Whitney for that discussion? Go ahead, share my screen. Right. Does anyone know who put this on the agenda? Who can take
This might have been Craig.
Oh, it is.
Craig made this, and I mean, me and Whitney and Craig and maybe Keith, a bunch of people were looking at this, but Craig made the worksheet, so I'm guessing he was the one that put it on here.
Okay,
so I can give some background here.
Maybe you okay? Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so if you look at there's a lot of different problems, but if you look at the feature status page on Istio.io, there's a lot of issues with it. Like some of the features just don't make sense as a feature at all. Like they're not even like, what is a feature of Istio is a vague question, and it's poorly answered in the docs. Like there's a feature that's like MongoDB or something. Like maybe that's a feature, maybe there's not. There's some that are even stupider. And like there's just all these super high level things like mutual TLS, and then there's some like really niche thing that's like this tiny obscure part of it, and it's all just kind of a mess of whatever someone happened to want to put in there. So there's that issue. And then there's the issue of things just being completely mislabeled, like something like auto MTLS being beta. That is not beta. That's on by default, used by every single Istio user since 1.5. I don't care what we want to call it on this page. There cannot be anything other than stable, right? And the same with a variety of other things on there, like upgrades, things like that. There's just things that clearly we haven't given a lot of love to this page. And so we stuck a label on them 5 years ago, and we haven't touched it since. The other final thing, and this is getting really into subjectiveness, is that like I'm not so sure that it really makes sense to have one big list of all the features in Istio and their status. Like even what a feature of Istio is like kind of a weird question. Like I mentioned earlier about like there being weird entries here. So there's been some talk about rearranging this in some way, whether that's only showing the unstable features, so it's a much smaller list and just like, hey, here's what's in development of Istio, or even not having one centralized location and just showing it on the documentation for each section. So like if DNS proxying is beta, anywhere we have docs on DNS proxying, we just have a little banner that says, hey, this is beta or something. So it's kind of three aspects here. I think the sheet that Craig added was not about how he organized the information, but was about how he categorized things and kind of doing a bulk look at the features and either removing some as features because they don't really make sense and kind of fold them into others, or recategorize them, so that we don't have to go through like the full feature promotion, or if we do, we just kind of do it all in one go with a big batch of things to save some time. So here's a proposed list of things that Craig put together. I don't know who has input in this. It may have just been me and Craig, may have been some others involved. But I think the idea was we just want to go look at a bunch of things that have been labeled as beta because we haven't thought to look at them and largely take them to GA.
So is this the right time to like dig in on individual items, or what should the discussion look like?
I don't know. That's a good question. I do think that's the type of thing we could end up spending 2 hours on, and I would love to talk about the other topics a lot. If the conversation is to just say yes to all 10, then I'm happy to do that now. But I would personally love to get to the ambient GA one and then talk about these. These have been around for 5 years, so there's certainly no rush to fix them in my mind.
Might be good to have this some part of this async as well, so someone like Craig can join in as well.
Yeah, and I also don't want to be like, we have 5 minutes to mark 10 features GA. Like that's probably not quite the level of thought that should go into this. So I'm perfectly fine having it just be async now that's been introduced.
Just one comment. I think we should have a conversation about gateway injection. In terms of if it makes sense to move that to GA, but I think everything else, I think it makes sense.
I also
Yeah.
wanted to add that we had a brief discussion on these features on July 10th in the combined working group. And we said that we probably don't want to promote locality load balancing. I linked the notes from that discussion, but yeah. The reasoning was that this is still like a new feature in upstream communities and Envoy, and we don't necessarily know where it's gonna go yet. So we want to do like a redesign.
Okay, it sounds like if we're thanks for the context, by the way. I also added that to the notes so we can find it again. That's helpful. I had forgotten about that discussion. It sounds like if we're all on the same page that we should be doing this refresh, then we can go offline and debate the details of each feature. Does that sound good? Anyone disagree on how we should do this or that we should do it?
No, that sounds good.
Okay.
Take an action item for that.
Good. Who is up next? I suspect that's Mitch.
Actually, I did not add that. It's
Yeah.
something I care about a lot, but I didn't put it there.
I added it, and it was
Okay.
based on the comment Mitch made in terms of like, how can we revisit the decisions we make so frequently and what we could do about that. So in the enhancement subgroup, we discussed maybe like potentially adding the time to live for a decision. For instance, like if the TOC came up with a consensus, like until we revisit, it needs to sit for at least 6 months or like 2 or 3 releases before we have actual data to change it or it warrants us bringing it up again. So I brought this up because I know Mitch is super passionate and I think we should think about this as well.
Thanks, Whitney. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably not alone in having heard from a few different community members about decisions that seem to get reevaluated frequently. I'm thankful that today Whitney pointed us back to a previous decision that we were sort of implicitly reopening. I think that's really useful. But I'm wondering if there's a way that we can do a better job of documenting decisions when they're made and then referring back to that document when those decisions are reopened.
Does anyone have any suggestions as far as concrete item? We've been trying to take notes, but not everybody in all the meetings and not everybody, miss the meeting, come back to check the notes, make sure they agree. I do agree. It's an ongoing problem in the community. Probably any open source projects too, by the way.
So Lynn and Mitch, is the problem that the decisions are not captured, or the problem that decisions are taken without all the inputs or context, and then we get more context and to revise the decision? Because if it's the second, it's just life, right? We have more information, so we have to change the decision.
It's possibly both of those, but it's also a third that some people are around when all the information is available. We discuss it, come to an agreement. They didn't agree with it, and they do not disagree and commit.
Okay, so both. So
Sounds very Amazonian of you, John.
Well, yeah.
exactly, right? So the first one is simple, right? Let's catalog in the document. This is the decision with some bold saying decision. So people want, they can search, right? I mean, being an open source project, trying to create some very complex project management hierarchy is not worth it. If it's second, I just don't know what you can do other than trying to get all the right stakeholders and context as soon as possible. And third, I mean, we all worked in professional careers long enough to know techniques to handle that. I don't want to go over that. Like, disagree and commit is part of life. What can you do?
I will say one thing from my perspective that could be done better is more of a goals oriented thing around decisions of what goals are we trying to achieve with this decision, and being very upfront about that, because that tends to make it much easier if in 6 months you need to reevaluate the decision. We change the goals, or do we need, are we still sustaining those goals, but the decision is different? And that helps to drive like future disagreements too, because right, do we disagree about the goals or the decision that descended from the goals? That I think would be a little bit better, as if we said, you know, for something like install, like what are the 3 goals for Istio install that the TOC wants to have? If that's up front, reevaluating decisions or sticking to them or changing them gets to be much easier, because you can say, okay, well, we have consensus about the goals, so does this decision still make sense in that context or whatever? So that part I think would be helpful to make that a little bit more explicit and upfront. Agree more on the goals so that the decision has more context.
Yeah, I agree with that, especially writing them down. That's easier to look back also. Okay, so these were the guiding posts based on which the decision was made. Sounds true.
I think maybe it's incumbent on the project leads too, to really be, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but be quick to point back to decisions that have already been made when a conversation gets reopened. Like I know Ben was exposed to a lot of whiplash around our Helm chart standardization for ambient and how we were going to document that and whether we were going to do it. And I feel like I'm at least partly responsible, because every time the conversation got reopened, I didn't jump in and say, hey, like we already decided about this and sent Ben off to do a whole bunch of work. He's been working on it for a month. Let's just go ahead and execute on what we decided before. Instead, we sort of, I'm very quick to, hey, that's a good point, and just ponder when there's not actually new information being introduced. So that could just be on us to kind of be better community leaders in that way.
I don't hold you anywhere responsible for that, Mitch. So don't worry. Like for that though, like I think again, like the question is the goal. What are the goals for the Istio install? And you know, whatever decision the TOC might have made about Helm may be wrong. I personally think some of them are wrong, or may be wrong in 6 months. Or our users may come back and say, I don't care what the TOC decided. We want Helm charts to work this way, right? That may happen. But if we've got goals in place of what, for instance, Istio wants, Istio's installation to follow these 3 primary goals, right? It should be easy. It should have a minimal number of steps. It should use standardized CNCF tooling. It should do blah, blah, blah. If we have those in place, it gets much easier to like say, yes, this furthers those goals, or no, this does not. Or, you know, and then you have the interesting question of it furthers one, but not the other, then maybe the talk has to decide or whatever. That's a different thing, but yeah.
Makes sense to me. Thanks, Ben.
Okay, so I wrote down better document decisions and goals. What can we do about when not everybody present and somebody else might weigh in to say this is not the right way, and I might be sway the discussion on a different angle.
Maybe for TOC members in particular, because I know we all have really busy schedules and have to miss, and I want all of us to be able to take vacations and not have to worry about that.
Yeah.
We say like after a decision is documented in one of our 3 meeting notes documents, you have a week to comment on it if you weren't in the meeting. At which point we could reevaluate it at the next week if there's, you know, outstanding comments.
Do we think a week is a good time though?
We could pick a different time horizon. I'm not particular.
I was gonna say probably at least 2 weeks.
2 weeks may be better, and maybe we should highlight the decision better in the notes, so people who's on vacation, if they choose to, hopefully they don't, at least when they come back, they can easily be able to tell these are the decisions they need to review if they have concerns.
Yeah, I agree. Like, we don't need to be too strict. I think usually we know, like, if I'm making something that's in Mitch's expert domain and I know Mitch is on vacation for a week, I'm not going to go say, oh, it's been 7 days, Mitch, sorry, you're 1 day too late, right? Like,
yeah,
we know the people here. It's not like we're dealing with random individuals, so we can, you know, be reasonable, I think.
Yeah, the goal is definitely not to strong arm anyone or anything like that. And frankly, we should always be willing to reconsider if we've made the wrong decision. But I feel like it's more a difference of degrees in terms of how willing are we to reconsider, how quickly do we reconsider our decisions.
All right, that sounds good. Anything else we should be doing? I saw you being adding notes specifically about goals, which makes sense.
Are there some recent examples of where we did a flip-flop in decision making where it impacted users or community in general? Like something major, if Whitney, yeah, you captured, it would be good for me to understand, like, what was the impact?
I can't think of the impact yet, but I know this came up in regards to our back and forth with is HEM the way forward versus Istio. And for instance, in the discussions around deprecating in cluster operator, we made some decisions based on the fact that HEM is the path forward. And I think in the ambient call, something else came up. Maybe Ben has more context here, but it was just a matter of like how not having like clear consensus about the direction influenced the decisions we made in different situations, and it having like a mismatch sometimes.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, since one of those folks who have been part of Istio from the very almost beginning, I would say Helm versus non-Helm has been a thing that has been going on forever. Sadly, it's just something that we could not settle it. But thanks for bringing it up. I understand.
All right, is there anything more we should discuss on this topic, or can we move on?
I'm good to move on.
All right, let's move on. So we have 35 minutes left. So last time in the ambient meeting, so for folks who missed the ambient meeting, we kind of started discussing, can we promote the existing ambient core features? Well, we documented in our blog when we released ambient as beta around KubeCon EU. So can we start working as a community, promote those functions to GA so that we have another splash along KubeCon US, which is coming up in middle November, I believe. So the ask for everybody on the community is to write down what do you think is critical for ambient, the core of the ambient that's in beta today to goes to GA. All right, so I saw John already putting aggregated responses. Should we, how do we want to do this? Do we want to go through each person together, one by one, or do we want to look at the aggregated response and have people kind of say, hey, what they think is missing? Maybe we go each person one by one, just give them a chance to speak. Would that be fair?
Sure.
Okay, so John, I think you have go
Yeah,
ahead.
I only put one because other people put stuff and I didn't feel the need to repeat it. So everything that's in the aggregated response, I mostly agree with. There's a couple I want to discuss, but we can get there when we get there.
All right. By the way, what is this thing? I'm definitely
Sorry, mutating webhook configs.
okay. Got it. Thank you. I'm not intelligent to pass that on Monday morning. Thank you.
That's all right. Kubernetes doesn't accept the abbreviation either. And every time I have to type it out in all of its 27 characters, I mutter under my breath.
All right, so I guess you guys kind of know John's list is the aggregated list that he agree with. I think mine also. Let me double check. So I mean, we have a lot of work on the performance. You guys all know we need a lot of community help. So we had an intern. I believe he's no longer an intern. So we do need to figure out how we get performance going forward and have a process in place, just making sure we don't regress between major releases. That's a hard requirement for GA.
Just to clarify, that's the process and measurement of the performance, not improving the performance, right?
Right, that is having a process out there, just making sure we have data to show people, yes. And then nice to have, I saw a couple of people agree, is the OSCE policy. For those of us who work on OSCE policy from layer 4 to layer 7, we know it's quite complex. So it would be really good to have some troubleshooting help for the users. And then we talk about GA, so I thought it would be really nice to have at least 2 users, 3 users running Ambient in production using some of the Ambient's core feature. And docs, we can always use more contents around docs. For example, upgrade is one I think Mitch is working on, but we also want to make sure in-place upgrades are well documented in addition to revision-based upgrades. And also, we've had like 10 people asking, how do we verify neutral TLS in Ambient? I'm sure there's more doc gaps, but so I think it's an important area going to GA. So I think, John, you pretty much have these on the aggregated response also. So does anyone have any concerns on some of these items?
No, I think these all make sense to me.
All right.
Just a quick, a little bit more precision. Sandwich mode for arbitrary data plane. Trying to parse that one.
We were going just on Lynn's and
Yeah, we're just going each person, so each person have a chance to speak, and then we'll come back to the aggregated, just so you know. So if there's no concern, I'm going to pass to Keith.
Yeah, for me, Alti status is a must-have, mainly because it was a late scratch. The comment there reminded me of how the discussions around ambient beta and Alti status was a late scratch, and I think that we should make good on that before moving to stable, because after stable, there's not going to be a lot of motivation to fix it, and I would like to see us generally fix the status posture of Istio. So anything to get us there, good on my end. The doc on trust model is again necessary for something to be called stable. Documentation, SEO and waypoint, detail upgrades. I searched like Istio waypoint upgrade and didn't find anything meaningful. So it might be an SEO question, might be my browser question, my particular search. Yeah, I found configuration and I found an old issue on the upgrade plan, but couldn't find like solid docs. So it might be just an SEO thing.
I think.
And yes, I use Google.
Oh,
you think what?
Never mind. I was going to say I think Mitch's doc hadn't landed yet, but I forgot we had some. Mitch was just improving it. So I agree with documenting this. I don't know if we can say it must be the first Google result is like a blocker for GA. Like we can't really control SEO that much.
Well, I mean, on the things that do show up, maybe a link out. So like 2 clicks would be my thing. So I agree. Not saying that they have to be like X number of results on Google, but just make it visible. I'm thinking about the user story, and the user trying to upgrade ambient. They should be able to find those instructions relatively quickly. And then last one was a TOC approved design doc for ambient multi-cluster. This is mainly just to ensure that protocols and APIs won't need any changes for a community supported ambient multi-cluster feature. So that's my list. I think it's nice to haves, but I think I generally agree with everybody else, and I've got some people's nice to haves and my musts. So yeah.
All right. So, Keith, I'm looking at the aggregated response. I just want to make sure what you have are pretty much covered. This one is covers multi-cluster, right? And the documentation upgrades. Should we add upgrades for waypoint here? Just making sure that's covered also.
I think it should be implied. I think it's
Okay,
not implied, but I
got
think
it.
just upgrades in general.
All right, let me make sure. OSC status, I think we have it covered if you agree, right? And doc on trust model, that's the last one on your list. Is that covered on the
Yep, it's
security
there.
model? Okay, so are you happy with this then?
Yes.
All right, awesome. That's easier. So thank you so much, kids. Let's move to Jeremy. Do we have Jeremy?
Oh,
on?
Jeremy's noted that he's not able to talk right now.
Oh,
He's got
okay.
it in the chat here.
Okay.
Yeah, I can read it out loud. It's basically just add another analyzer for better user experience. It'd be good for UX, but might require some rework of the analyzer due to how we get the information there. There's some more details in the issue linked. So I put that in the aggregate as more analyzers. It kind of ties into status. Status and analyzers are very related.
All right. So it sounds like that's a good one too. Yeah, thanks. Mitch, you want to go next?
Yes. Let's see. I'm thinking like experimental or proof of concept level multi-cluster, so that we can show that we're not going to change something fundamental about like ztunnel or the way that our ztunnel HBone interacts with Envoy HBone in order to support multi-cluster. This isn't like the multi-cluster is shipped. I recognize that it's in a different sort of band of features in terms of its progress towards stability, but I'd like to make sure that we're not going to have to make a fundamental shift or breaking changes. Yeah, John.
Yeah, how do you feel about making this just that we have confidence that we won't have to make breaking changes? Like we future-proof the design, but not necessarily that someone has gone and implemented it and merged it and it's experimental.
For my part, the way that I get confidence is by seeing proofs of concept or experimental functionality. Like a design doc is good, but oftentimes implementation uncovers challenges. I am working on finding resources within Microsoft to begin work on this pretty much immediately. So this is both something that I'd like to see happen, but also something that I'm willing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think that there's a lot of things, like for example, if ztunnel can support multi-cluster, but we don't have East2D set up in a way such that it programs the XDS to do it, then in my mind, that proves that it can be done, because obviously we can get East2D to configure the information.
Yeah.
We just haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to
I think that makes a lot of sense. The XDS or WDS in the case of ztunnel is a private API. It's not something that we've documented for stability. So changes in that, as long as we can keep our N+1 and N-1 compatibility guarantees for ztunnel on upgrades, or actually, oh, I probably ought to add that. We should make N+1 and N-1 compatibility guarantees for ztunnel on upgrades if we haven't already. That came up in the docs review recently. As long as we can keep that basically like you're able to upgrade, we can make whatever changes we need to WDS. So I totally get it if Istio-D hasn't implemented that sort of thing. I'm more worried about like user-facing APIs, critical changes to HBone that would impact users.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that. I just wanted to see if we could maybe make it more abstract of that. We've proven it out, and we may prove that out with a proof of concept. We may prove that out by merging something experimental. We may prove it out by thinking about it a lot.
Yep.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, sorry, someone else was talking.
I can go after you finish, John. That's it.
No, I was done. I was just going to say we also should talk about the cross-version one that you've added now.
I just want to ask a question, Mitch, around your statement for multi-cluster. Like, Istio supports like too many modes for multi-cluster, in my opinion, already, and the existing sidecar support for multi-cluster has never been graduated to GA. Is that correct? It's still beta.
It is beta today. We just discussed putting it on GA, but yes.
Okay, so based on maybe your understanding of the customers, like for ambient, which one of these modes would be the ones that we want to really tackle and support, or we have to go and do everything again?
When you talk about modes, are you talking about control plane topology, network topology?
Yes.
So in terms of network topology, I would say multi-network with east-west gateways.
Okay.
Or whatever east-west gateways turn to look like. I'm not married to like the idea of Envoy instances running that, but some way that actually John had a great document about this like a year and a half ago. Some way that you can get traffic between regions reasonably and without having to have every cluster know every detail of every other cluster. East-west gateways tends to be the way that we do that. So that's the data plane topology. I'm a little less opinionated on control plane topology. I think we've shown that we're capable of running in a variety of control plane topologies with sidecar mode. So I'm probably willing to tolerate some hand waviness there. Again, as long as we're showing that the data plane is capable, the rest is kind of details.
What's the absence of a single network mode intentional?
I don't really consider that to be multi-cluster effectively.
Well, like two clusters, but they're same network. That
Right.
you're not that okay. So that's not a priority from your point of view.
That would not be a priority for me. It's not a pattern that I think ever advised a customer to use. We tend to tell customers, like when I was at Google, we told customers you needed a VPC per cluster effectively. And I think we make the same advice at Azure. So unless there's something significant I'm missing, that wouldn't be particularly of interest to me.
Well, I do think that there is something to say for some of the potential overhead of a multi-network if you're having to route through an extra hop. So when I implemented multi-cluster, I issued our company made the decision to not do the multi-network topology because we didn't feel we needed it. But to that point, like when it comes to priority for implementation, the way I think about it is if you implement multi-network, you've implemented single network to some extent. So I can live with it, but I do think I can anticipate questions there. I just think it's thinking of goals and decision making, right? I think it's important to make sure that we're aware of all the data when it comes to decisions here.
Yeah, I guess now that I think about it, really the single network mode, if we're just talking about future proofing, it's already done. Maybe I haven't convinced everyone else of that, but I'm very confident that I can because it's a pretty trivial proof of future proofing. So maybe it's not worth debating too much on that, even if it's not like when we go implement something, we're going to support single network as the main thing. Like we just need to know that we can do it. And I'm very confident we can because it's only a control plane aspect of munging all the data together. There's absolutely no changes in Z-tunnel. So, and we know that we can merge protobufs together. That's what we're good at. So
You would effectively just create the superset of all the WDSs from each of the cluster, right?
yeah, it's just how you go from looking at one cluster of information to go look at multiple and merge them all together into the outputs. So it may not be the most trivial thing in the world, but I'm 100% confident that it can be done.
In this vein, separate from the kind of proof of technical ability part, have the MCS APIs evolved in any meaningful way in the last 3 years?
Nope.
Are the MCS APIs effectively dead?
I wish Mac was here. There is new the whispers of new life in the MCS project. There are discussions about completely changing the format of the API to remove spec and status and just have it look like endpoint slice, where you kind of have all the data in the root of the resource. So there is new discussion there. To our earlier question, though, MCS still and considering how long it took to get here, any idea of MCS supporting multi-network is very, very far away and unlikely, in my opinion. So that's something to keep in mind.
Right. Yeah. No, that seems vanishingly distant at this point.
Agreed.
Because there are two multi-cluster problems, right? There's obviously there's what Istio did, and then are there good APIs for controlling the surface? the discovery surface. Right, as Costin has been talking about for a very long time, right? Like we have Istio hijacking the definition of cluster.local and effectively aliasing it to be mesh.global is interesting. It's not, I don't think we have enough signal to know if users are informed enough about whether that choice is a good one or a bad one, the default choice. It's what we've done. It's likely what we would have to continue to do. But there is a question about whether we offer an option to do something else.
Louis, we've talked a lot about this in the weekly meetings, and I think the key to getting out of the quandary we have there, we don't want to break compatibility with users who have already adopted. So the thing that was default for them when they installed needs to stay default. At the same time, I think it's difficult to argue that that's the right default for any new users of Istio, particularly if they're onboarding a brownfield cluster that's already operational. It's very surprising to find out that your cluster.local traffic has suddenly become multi-cluster. So I've totally lost the name of the feature that we've come up with in the last year. Version compatibility? No, what are we calling it?
All the way around. Compatibility versions.
Yes, compatibility versions, where we're effectively allowed to change our defaults and say, like, if I'm on compatibility version 122, I'm getting all of the defaults that I had when I installed 122. And that might be around for a year or even 2 years after 122. Whereas if I install, let's say, 124 and we've fixed this cluster.local problem, we're able to change the default for net new users without breaking existing ones. Does that make sense?
I get the mechanism. There's nothing inherently wrong with the mechanism. The question is the API and the concept around the control the right one? Right, like ultimately whether your traffic goes multi-cluster or not is technically a load balancing decision, not a do I have multi-cluster capability decision. We don't offer APIs that let people control the scope of load balancing in ways that would facilitate them achieving equivalent outcome, right? So I think there's still that UX and API challenge. Like obviously a way to toggle defaults, fine, but I still don't think that's actually really solving the problem, although it may improve the problem.
I think all of this is very good questions to have, but do they impact our GA and ambient? In my mind, these are things we need to do to make.
I don't think it impacts the GA because we're going to be carrying the default. I don't see a way around that.
No, they don't impact the GA as far as I'm concerned, but it's a technical question, so we have to deep dive it right now. It's very interesting.
MCS might have impacted the GA, but the other thing does not. But
well, if there's no multi-cluster, then how you solve multi-cluster, what new APIs are used for multi-cluster don't necessarily need to be solved, right? Because they're all additive. Sure. It's only if we need to break an API.
Yeah, it's only if MCS was going to be a massive forcing function. But it's not the case. So.
Okay. Should we go to cross-version one, or is there other comments?
Yeah, can we do a recap on the meets requirement on multi-cluster? So I think we all agree on future-proof multi-cluster API and protocols, right?
Yeah.
Now, as far as the implementation, do we need to implement any of that on the data plane side? Is a single network sufficient?
Single network is not sufficient, I think, is what we sort of collectively came to on the last point. As far as implementation, that's how I prefer to have confidence. But if we find, that we have the design thorough enough to build confidence, I think that's acceptable. And I don't mean implementation in terms of like, oh, we've released it and it's at beta quality. I mean, like, I built this one version, weird branch of Istio, and it did a multi-cluster thing. I can see that it's doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, or like a tested Z-tunnel setup with some manually tweaked WDS. Yeah.
All right, that
I'm
sounds
sure
good.
Channel can load WDS from like a config map or something like that is one of its like alternate features.
Yep, they can do that. So
All right, so sounds like we have consensus on this, right? The docs are future-proof is the must. Implementation, experimental POC would be very nice to have, especially I think Mitch, you may also have resources for that.
Yes.
Awesome. And then Mitch, let's go to your next one, cross-version compatibility.
Yeah, this just came up as a relatively small point in the docs update that I'd been working on for the last couple of months, and that is that I'm not sure we've committed to the Z-tunnel SKU being supported across control planes, or even data plane SKU with Z-tunnel. That might just have been a documentation oversight. I don't know if we're testing for that.
I thought that we have it for the current version and +1. That's
that is what I have. Yeah, we do have it.
Yeah, right.
That being said, I don't know if we test this to the right degree. But yeah, I mean, we can add this and it may just already be done and then it's an easy check off. In my mind, I agree with the requirement. It may be one we've already met.
Yeah, I think we've probably already met it. Like we've done a bunch of upgrades and they've worked. So that seems to indicate that there's compatibility, but just making sure that that's well documented. I was not confident when I wrote that sentence that we had clarity around that commitment, but it sounds like we do. So that's great.
All right, great. So maybe we'll just add a testing requirement on this, just making sure it's being tested.
Yeah, that's what I put up on the
Awesome. Thank you. Mitch, let's see, Canary upgrade without
Mutating webhook configs.
Yeah, I think that's already on here. Is there anybody have any concerns with that?
This may be very pedantic, but we're talking specifically with tags, right? You can do revisions without it.
Yeah, there's been some controversy around tags, so I hesitate to name them as the way to do this. It's more the user story. I can upgrade without relabeling my entire cluster in a canary manner and without creating mutating webhook configs. I think tags are probably the right way to do that. If other people disagree, we can come up with something else, but it seems like a basic part of being able to operate this sort of thing in production, that you can safely upgrade it without super user privileges.
So do we want to go a little bit further and say that we want to canonicalize like a recommended best practice for multi-revision upgrade?
Yes, Costin and I took an action item to work on that a month ago. I have not worked with him at all on it yet, but it is on my to-do list.
Okay, I think the canonical,
it's going to be less giving you the toolbox of tags and revisions and saying good luck, and more like prescriptive. Hey, here's probably how you want to manage your tags and revisions, a 2-channel model for your cluster, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. We can debate whether that should be nice to have or not. I think it probably should be a must, but I could see an argument for it being a nice.
On the one hand, we've been stable in Sidecar without it for a very long time. On the other hand, that's not necessarily something I'm proud of.
Yeah, it kind of sucks.
Yeah, on the same, like on one hand, I agree we should do this. It's also something that could be done in the future in a backwards compatible way. So that to me means it doesn't mean it can't be must have, but it means it could be a nice to have. The interesting thing about this one is it's the only thing on here that requires actual engineering and coding work other than status reporting, but status reporting already has proof of concepts that are pretty far along. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. I just found it interesting. Almost all the other things around documentation, testing, like the less strict coding stuff.
Which is expected from beta to GA.
Right, that is expected. Yeah, so I just want to like point out, like we will need to go like actually start building this out pretty quickly, or it could easily become the thing that we slip behind on. Especially because some of the coding stuff, like the documentation you can do kind of last minute at the one day before the release, like worst case scenario, like coding obviously has to be way before. So I just want to throw that out. I'm not saying that means it shouldn't be a must have or shouldn't be on here.
Yeah, that makes
Or
sense.
maybe
For
maybe
my
this is a very, very nice to have.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm thinking about it, like I would say, like I agree, we should go start working on this ASAP as high priority. If it came down to it, we had all the other things, but not this. I don't think that I would say we should block the GA personally, which to me, I guess means that to me it isn't very nice to have.
Yeah. So can I ask, contextualize this? This is for waypoint upgrade. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
So if I'm a user, I'm not using revision-based upgrade for waypoint, this wouldn't impact me. If my upgrade strategy is I'm in place upgrading my waypoint, I don't care about this function. Is that right?
Yeah. If you're YOLOing your cluster, canaries are really not relevant to you.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I would definitely put this in nice to have. So this is the first, like everybody said, it doesn't exist in Sidecar. Secondly, I think Mitch, you did a survey. We had like a third of user using in place, a third of user using revision-based upgrade, and that doesn't mean they use revision upgrade for Sidecar. It could be they use revision-based upgrade for control plane. So I'm just saying the user base who's going to do revision-based upgrade for waypoint is going to be less than a third. So, and this is the improvement, usability improvement of that.
So there's no such thing as a canarying your control plane without canarying your data plane. When you run two control planes simultaneously in the cluster, you necessarily can canary your sidecar or other data plane. So it would be at least a third. We've gotten a lot of noise on that question in the survey over the years until we stopped doing it about a year and a half ago. We got some where nearly all users were making use of revisions. We got some where nearly all users were doing in place. It was one of the least consistent responses we had in the survey set, which was disappointing.
Yeah, okay, so let's say a third, but I'm missing your points about you can't do, did you say you can do revision-based control plane, but not in-place data plane?
If you are revisioning your control plane,
Yeah.
you're revisioning your data plane.
I think you guys are just using different terminology here. When Lynn is talking, in my opinion, about revisioning the data plane, what she means is taking the data plane thing and making two deployments side by side and scaling them up and down.
Oh.
Which is something that's pretty niche.
Yeah.
It's something that with a waypoint would be extremely hard to do. Like
Yes.
extremely hard to do. So we should effectively consider that not a thing, in my mind.
I have some ideas how to do that, but that is not at all what I have in mind with this requirement.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I linked to how we document that you can do it with Ingress Gateway, where it's a little more easy to do. In theory, you could do the same with your app. In theory, you could do it with Waypoint, but no one's really doing that at all. So
yeah.
So your requirements, this is just making sure I understand that your requirement is revision-based control plane, but for the waypoint, you run one revision, you run one version, right? You don't run two concurrently.
Per waypoint. Each waypoint is on one revision or the other.
Okay, then if that's the case, I guess the reason you need a tag is because you don't want to relabel your waypoint. Is that right?
Yeah, if you a lot of our customers have like 5,000 namespaces, relabeling would be a scripting operation that would be high risk.
Okay, got it. Okay, so yeah, thank you, John, for that clarification. Yes, that's what I was talking about.
Cool.
Okay, and then it's not just waypoint; it's actually node too for ztunnel.
Let me think about that. I guess technically the ztunnel does have which. It's triggered it's triggered very differently, and tags can't really impact it. And at least we've not found a good way for tags to impact it. But it's true that ztunnel does connect to a revisioned control plane. And typically, if you're upgrading the version of the revision, the ztunnel, you want to set it to a new revision of the control plane that matches its version. And that being said, I've just talked over Ben. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that, like, I think most of what Lynn said, that I don't think revisions in general are as useful in ambient, and so I would like to slow roll doing all the stuff that we do in sidecars there until we know people use it properly. Like we don't revision the data plane in ambient. We revision parts of it, which I'm still concerned is going to be a weird surprise to users when they figure that out. And we don't really have any safe upgrade mechanism for CNI at all, except for node coordinating. And if you're going to coordinate the nodes, then it gets a little weird. And we also know for a fact that then said that a lot of people just don't do canary upgrades; they just do it in place and they blow away the cluster. So we have an in-place upgrade that's probably good enough for GA. As far as tags versus revisions, for GA, I am okay with like having a revision documentation, a way to do it documented with revisions. But tags are effectively a UX porcelain on top of that, and I'm okay deferring tags entirely for GA because you can do it all like everybody's saying with revisions. And I think there's still some debate about whether tags are implemented correctly or how we want to implement them. So like if we could do it with revisions, let's just say here's a way to do it with revisions, not mention tags. Tags are not part of the GA, and that's it. And then I think that's basically current state, and we're fine. So yeah, I don't really want to add more stuff for this in GA because I think the overall feature is of debatable use in ambient, and I'd rather start slow, do the minimal possible, and kind of see how people take it, which I think is like the current state, and we ship that.
So ambient does support tags today. They're currently implemented as mutating webhook configurations.
Yeah.
So that's particularly what this item targets.
Right, but those are sidecar webhooks. They're not ambient. Doesn't ship those webhooks really. Like you can install them, it's a little weird, but they're intended for sidecars, and we've said I think that we would like ambient to work without webhooks entirely. So
yeah, and that's exactly what this is.
Right, yeah, I agree. And that's why I like say like just don't do tags. If we don't do tags, we can sort of elide some of that for now. Like yes, it's a little more cumbersome because you have to change your labels, but like if you get to that point and you use this feature a lot and you're like, gee, this is a pain, come tell us, and then we have like data.
With respect, the reason that tags exist is because users did it and it was painful and they came and told us.
Right, but again, that's with sidecar where revisions and canary-based upgrades work entirely differently. In ambient, it's not even clear that you would need it as much. Like an in-place upgrade already doesn't require you to restart your workloads. Like there's no workload restarting here, right? Which was the main reason this stuff was created in the first place, to kind of insulate people from that. But ambient already elides that. So I don't know if people are going to want to use the feature to quite the same degree, especially with a lot of the gotchas it has in ambient, specifically around the data plane and the CNI.
Okay.
All right.
I don't mean to interrupt, but we are very short on time. It sounds like we need to talk about that one more.
Yeah.
Maybe we can move on for now.
Yeah, I agree. So Mitch, I think that's the last one on your list. I mean, nice to have. Maybe we can get to it next time.
That's fine by me. We should get to bed.
Yeah, we'll make sure we save a few minutes for Ben's.
I'm going to try to condense this into like 2 minutes. All I'm saying is I would like some more clarity because there hasn't been on like what we want to do for GA as far as, again, setting goals for what the install experience should be. I think we said before Helm was the recommended thing in beta. If Helm is recommended, like the current state of Helm is we've had complaints about how it's piecemeal charts. We've talked about composing those charts so the install flow is much simpler. But if we do that, we need to do that before we go GA, because if we tell people they need to install with individual charts and then later we compose those, there's no good upgrade path there. And I don't want to tell people, here's GA, you do it the hard way, and then in 6 months, here's another GA where you do it the easy way, but you can't upgrade from the hard way to the easy way. Sorry, because we didn't, do it that way. So I would like to kind of pick whatever we're going to pick, if it's one or both or neither, whatever, and then like set some goals around what the experience should be and make sure that whatever we ship for GA and the install mechanism for any of the supported approaches is like something that is as simple as it can be and something we have an upgrade path from if we have future work planned for it. And I don't have confidence that we're there with Helm because there's things that we know we're not doing correctly with Helm that we haven't fixed, that if we fixed, it would be hard for people to move from the hard way that we do now to the easy way. And like that's the kind of stuff I would like to like make sure we're thinking about, right? I don't want to tell people do this and then in 6 months be like, here's a much better way to do it, but you can't upgrade to that if you did it the old way previously. Sorry, like that's a bad look, and I don't want to do that.
Okay.
So yeah, goals would be good.
I summarized that at the top as install mechanisms that are approved and will not require breaking changes post GA. Does that accurately capture what you've said?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, so we can decide what those mechanisms are, but that will take much more than 1 minute. So
Yeah, that's all I want to say is make sure we consider that before we call it.
All right, good capture. So how about this? I mean, we're at the top of the hour. Louis, you still have something. How about we continue some of this discussion on Wednesday at our ambient meeting? Because I would like to kind of having us reach consensus as soon as possible so we can, have the community help us to reach some of the must-have and some of the nice-to-have. John?
yeah, I agree with that, but it would be nice just to get a feeling like we just aggregated all this stuff here. Did we just put a bunch of stuff here and no one agrees with it? Or is everyone looking at this list and thinking like, this is solid, we should basically approve this, but we just need to wrap up the final discussions? From my point of view, it's all good. Looks like Keith, Mitch, Ben, I don't know, the last Louis. There's too many thumbs. I can't track them.
Good.
Ben, Eric. Okay. So, okay, we're looking like
Eric had to drop, but yes, he said yes.
Yep. Okay, and Rush. Okay, so everyone's at least like 90% on board. That's good.
That's awesome. Well, great discussion. Let's continue some of these Wednesday ambient meeting. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lynn, for coming.
Bye.
Take care, all.